Bonjour. Hello. That is all the French I have, so the rest of the talk is going to be in English, if that's okay with Neil and you guys.
Mais oui.
Oh, 2 words. Already showing me up. But hello, everyone. Welcome to the Spotlight on North America. It's Friday morning, which means congratulations are in order. You have survived Midem. Well done. And you're awake, hopefully. So we're going to keep you that way. I'm Mark Sutherland. I'm the editor of Music Week, which is the music industry publication, we like to think, for the international music industry. And I'm here to interview a man who also knows a thing or two about surviving, not just Midem, but the music industry. He began playing in bands. He's been a producer, a major label A&R man. He's worked with everyone from Britney Spears to Whitney Houston. But you probably know him as the long-running president of the Recording Academy and the person in charge of the Grammy Awards and all the controversies that go with them. He's been running that show since 2002, but he will step down at the end of July, which means he should be able to tell us all his secrets now. That's right, hopefully. So please welcome Neil Portnow.
Thank you, Mark.
We're going to have time for a few questions from you guys at the end, so start thinking of anything you'd like to ask Neil. But in the meantime, we should crack on. So, Neil, you've had a multifaceted career, but you did start out playing in bands. So does that mean you're a frustrated rock star?
Oh, absolutely. No question. I was watching television with my family at the age of 6 or so. And at that time, music was pretty bland, pretty mellow. And Elvis Presley came on the screen, and that was inspirational to me. I'd never seen anything like it. And I said, that's what I want to do. So I bugged my mom and dad, and eventually I got guitar lessons, and that was sort of the beginning of it all.
Yeah. And you didn't quite become Elvis, obviously, in your
not remotely close
in your music career. But do you think it helped that you've been a performer? Has it helped understand some of the people you work with over the years?
Well, I think in my career it's been critical, because being a musician, understanding the dynamics of music, understanding the relationships that musicians have with each other, understanding the creative process, and then understanding the intersection of creativity and art with commerce has really always been a great advantage for me in terms of having an empathy and a real understanding of what the creative community thinks.
Yeah, and you worked in the record industry for a long time. You were at RCA, 20th Century, Arista, EMI, Jive, and that was, you were there sort of what many people would say was perhaps the peak era for recorded music, the 70s and the 80s. So we've got a few young people in the room. While keeping it PG rated, Neil, what was it really like back then to work in the record industry when it was huge back then?
Well, pretty exciting, pretty heady, pretty controversial in terms of some of the things that might have been going on. But I would say a lot of what happened was by gut from a business standpoint. A&R people in the industry had an intuition and an instinct about music. There wasn't sort of the analytics and the different perspectives that happen today. So it was kind of the Wild West. Anything goes. Things that were extreme were interesting. The lifestyles were rather extravagant and sometimes a little bit questionable. And some people made it through that and some people didn't. Some people got stuck. But pretty exciting times.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned A&R, so you were an A&R man. Nowadays, people can look at all sorts of Spotify numbers and social media numbers before they make that leap of faith into signing an act. You generally know whether they've got some traction or not before that happens. How's that changed the music industry, having that knowledge as opposed to just having to think, I think this band are really good, I'm going to give them $1 million and see what happens?
Well, look, I think at the core of music and creativity is creativity. So I don't think you can substitute analytics and numbers and playlists and things of that nature for the determination of great art and great careers. It's certainly a tool, and it's important. But there's still a lot of gut that has to go into this business, and finding, the true artist is not necessarily about what's the most popular. Sometimes it's the things that are on the fringe, that are on the outside, that are trend setting rather than trend following, that make for great careers. So I always kind of think that gut instinct's going to be important, and particularly having people who have that musical background and understanding of art is always going to be important in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, you worked with some phenomenally popular artists. You were at Arista with Clive Davis when Whitney Houston was coming up, which must have been interesting. Tell us about that. How was it working with Whitney and Clive?
Well, that's a great story. So Whitney was 19 years old. She was performing with Cissy Houston, who was somewhat of a famous singer and more on the jazz side. And one of the A&R people from Arista was at a club one night, saw Whitney, came back and told Clive about it, Clive Davis, that is. And Clive went to see her, was blown away, and we signed her at the age of 19. Then it was a matter of creating a career. And of course, she was not a songwriter, but she was one of the greatest singers and interpreters of songs on the planet. So we launched into creating the repertoire and the setting and the approach to doing her first album. And I remember Clive saying to me, this was kind of fun, he said, well, Neil, Whitney's so great, we can't just send out cassettes of her demos and so on. People have to see her. So would you put on a showcase for her in Los Angeles and invite the top producers and songwriters and so on to see her, and then we'll get going. And so I did that, and from that came the beginning of the first album, which, as we all know, was a groundbreaking success for her.
Yeah, she did okay in the end, record sales, wasn't she? And you were also at Jive, which was sort of the kind of the peak of the pop era, Britney Spears, NSYNC, all that kind of stuff, which that must have been quite an education as well, because at that point it just seemed like things didn't get any bigger than that, really, did they?
True. And by the way, there's a case of not an accident. Clive Calder, who was the owner of Zamba and Jive Records. Clive's from South Africa originally and spent a lot of time living in the UK. So he's not American, and so his perspective on music was always an international perspective. And to me, I thought that was always an advantage, because he was not beholden or sort of in the bubble of American music. And so he literally saw a niche in the marketplace that was not being filled at the time, and that was music for young kids at that time. And obviously kids want to have something that's their own. They're not just interested in what mom and dad are listening to. He identified that as a niche not being served, and we went out specifically looking for artists that would appeal to young kids. Backstreet Boys was the first band signed. It was released in America. It mid-charted. Clive was not concerned about that. It came out in Germany, came out in Europe, was a smash hit. We brought it back to America a year later, and the whole genre blew up. So you had Backstreet and Britney and Aaron Carter and NSYNC and Justin and so on and so forth. But again, Clive's a musician, Calder, and having that instinct, but also having an international perspective, I think, really made a difference there.
Yeah, definitely. And then you went from that, and then 2002, you joined the Recording Academy, which I guess at that time many people thought was a fairly dusty old institution. You're coming from all this pop excitement. What on earth made you want to do that?
Well, truth is that I was a volunteer for the Recording Academy for well over a decade before I came to work at the Academy. We have a lot of great folks in the industry who volunteer their time to be on our boards and trustees to make policy for the organization. And I decided that I could give my time and service to the organization, and had done that for over a decade. When the time came for the next level of leadership, frankly, I wasn't thinking about that. I was right in the midst of Jive and Zamba and having a good run run at it. But I thought this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and when the Academy and some of the folks there kind of knocked on the door and said, Neil, you have an interesting pedigree. You know the industry. You are a professional. You're respected, well-liked, but you know us. You know the Academy. You know the culture and all of those elements. So you put that together, you'd be a really good candidate. And I thought, okay, maybe so. I put my hat in the ring. There were about 100 candidates that applied. And so through that process, I was the lucky recipient of the job and never looked back, and it's the greatest experience I've ever had.
Did you think at the time you were going to be there for 17 years?
Not even remotely. And frankly, nobody has. We've actually had 3 paid presidents of the Academy. Prior to that, the head of the Academy was a volunteer, so the chair of the board volunteered their time. The organization got big enough that it needed a paid staff. And the first president was there for about 6 months. He came from the industry. The second president was there about a dozen years. I'm in the third, and 17 years was a very unexpected long run and a great one.
Well, it must have changed quite a bit in those 17 years, I'm guessing. What do you think is the biggest change that you've been through at the Academy?
Well, I think culturally we've changed and we've grown. So now we are, the preeminent awards show on the planet. At least we believe that that's true.
The Brits might have something to say.
Yeah,
about
well,
that.
we could duke that out, right? The influence of the Grammy Award is international. The telecast is broadcast in 190 territories. We have the highest ratings and the largest audience on the planet. And I think it's really the most coveted award because it's a peer award. It's not about sales or marketing or hits. It's really about excellence determined by your peers. And that keeps it at a level unlike any other award. So that really, the preeminence of that is a change that we welcome, but also the reach that we now have in so many different other areas, whether it's advocacy for creators' rights and being paid properly, whether it's Music Cares, which deals with musicians in times of need and crises, and we literally save lives there. The Grammy Museum, which deals with certainly archiving and preservation of the history that we are the stewards of, but also our music education programs, which are quite substantial because we believe the next generation of music makers and music executives comes through good education. So those are the kinds of things that I'm really proud that have really expanded and grown.
Yeah, I mean, you've done quite a bit of campaigning over those years. The Music Modernisation Act finally was passed, which you were leading, and that must have been a good moment because I guess that perhaps the difference between 2002 and 2019 is that musicians need someone to stick up for them now, whereas back then maybe it wasn't quite such a concern for everybody.
Well, the MMA, the Music Modernization Act, is the fruit of 15 years of work, to be honest with you. And frankly, there had been many attempts to modernize in America the climate and the legislation because we are regulated in America for a lot of our industry. And it's just based on rules and regulations that were created 50, 60 years ago. They're not at all remotely relevant to today's world. It's pre-digital, it's pre-all of that. So this was something that needed modernization, so it's aptly named, but difficult to do. This was the year that we had a nonpartisan support for this, and frankly, the Music Modernization Act is kind of interesting, particularly those of you that are from America. It is one of very few bills that was passed unanimously by the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate and then signed into law by the president. As you know, in Washington, there's not too much that people agree on. So the fact that both sides of the aisle here were in agreement and we worked hard to do it around this legislation is really quite extraordinary.
Probably the best thing that Donald Trump's ever signed, I'm guessing. But now, what in your time at the Academy, the music business has also changed quite a bit. It's not just the Academy. In fact, your arrival, you got out of the record business just in time, didn't you? Because I know perhaps you saw what was coming when no one else did. But there was a very long slump in sales. Sort of, at the turn of the century. The business only just sort of coming out of, really. You had a front row seat for that, dealing with the artists, dealing with the labels. Looking back, what do you think, what caused that slump, and what were the sort of key factors in turning it around for you?
It's an interesting question and a provocative one. You know, as you talked about 70s and 80s, the music business was a lot by gut, a lot by seat of the pants, a lot by instinct, a lot by just having a good time. And the fact that business was so good and so robust sort of felt like this was going to go on forever, and there weren't other things that were changing. So I think there was, frankly, a bit of a laziness in paying attention to the future, and you can never do that. The minute that you are complacent about where you are, if you're number one, you won't be number one for long unless you're thinking about who's behind you and nipping at your tail. So I think the fact that changes were ignored, there was an arrogance perhaps about how we were doing as an industry, and frankly, not paying attention to what was coming in technology. Now, technology ultimately has been a friend to the music industry, but there's also a great fear of it, and there was a lack of knowledge about it. So as technology was changing and developing, it really wasn't focused on. It was feared, ignored, and frankly also, as an industry, we thought we knew it all, and we thought we could tell the consumer what they wanted and how they would get it. And that was a big mistake at a time when the evolution of business in general in the world was changing, where consumers know what they want. They're going to tell the brand and the companies how they want it, where they want it, and if you're not listening, you're out of business. So there we are in the old style, not paying attention to new delivery systems, not listening to the consumer. Labels, the industry had no direct intersection or point of contact with the consumer, all through a middleman. So we kind of lost our way, and it took years to pull out of that. We could talk about how that happened, but it's really extraordinary that as an industry, we weren't educated and sophisticated enough to be prepared for what happened, and we suffered for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, 15 years of decline, most industries don't come back from that. It's like horse and carts making a comeback after the invention of the car, which I don't think happened. What changed? Because the industry has embraced technology. So what was the difference? Why did suddenly people go, oh, actually we should get behind that? Was it just that there was nothing left to protect?
Well, when you get to the bottom, there's nowhere to go but up, right? So you have an industry that's struggling and suffering and losing fans, losing sales, losing its typical patterns of distribution and business models just weren't working. So you're forced to kind of huddle and circle the wagons and start to figure things out, and also realize maybe you don't know everything you think you knew. And so I think it created a time of a more sophisticated approach to business. When I first started in the industry, I don't think at the companies that I worked at, there was perhaps even one individual with a degree in business, a master's in business, or things of that nature. It was all, again, kind of gut and fun. And so the approach to business was very lackadaisical. When you start to change that, and you bring in people that have business experience and analytics and are looking at the market and are looking at the world and have expertise, and you have a willingness to change, that was really the beginning of the change. And I think people also learned that, again, technology is not necessarily our enemy. I mean, we made some interesting moves. The introduction of digital into our world was welcomed, and it was frankly a windfall for record companies, because all the music that came out on CD that never was on CD from a catalog standpoint, all those sales were a gift, because that music had been out before. Now it's re-released, there's new revenue streams. What people weren't thinking about was the fact that once you're in a digital domain, protecting that is as important as selling it. And so the protection wasn't there, and you had rampant piracy and things of that nature. Again, living through all of that, you learn that you have to treat this as a proper business, not just music and fun and creativity. They go hand in hand.
That doesn't sound very rock and roll, sadly.
It wasn't.
But did you ever think that the industry wasn't coming back? You're effectively the head of the music industry, or the figurehead of the music industry. Did you ever think that this business just was going to fade away?
No, I never felt that the business of music would fade away. I did think, and we did see, that the then models of sales and marketing, distribution, and either ownership or physical product and so on changed, but music's never going away. I mean, if anything, it's more common, ubiquitous, it's more important to the human condition. We've done studies through Grammy Foundation and through grants that music influences babies in the womb. It changes people's lives. It changes their ability to think and to act, whether they become musicians or not. So music is so critical. Imagine a world without it. And I just never thought that was possible. It was just about retooling the business in a fashion that could sustain and support the creativity and the art. Unfortunately, we've found a way to do that.
Yeah, if there was no music, none of us would be in the south of France today, and that would be awful, wouldn't it? But so let's talk a bit about the Grammys, because they are, like you say, a massive music awards show. They're an institution, which I guess has good things and bad things about it, for some people certainly. But taking it from 2002 to 2019, how much harder has it got to do that kind of mass appeal, multi-genre TV awards show in the modern age? Because there's not many of them out there anymore, I guess.
It was hard in 2002, and it's even tougher today, mainly because the artist community is more sophisticated today than it was. Many artists have their own entourages of people that help them, whether it's A&R and repertoire, whether it's style, whether it's choreography, whether it's sound and lighting. So there's a sophistication there today that really wasn't quite there years past. And of course, the live business now is so vibrant. So many artists are out touring, making a good part of their living and income from it, giving fans direct access. So every artist, particularly the ones of stature, have their teams. And so if we're doing 20 or 22 or 23 performances in one night, in 3.5 hours in one venue, we are now dealing with those teams, and that becomes a little more complicated than an artist just showing up on your doorstep and saying, I'm ready to do my Grammy performance, and having our producers and our team create that. It's much more collaboration. It's also, there's more competition. So there are other award shows, there's the live shows, there's the timetable and the conflicts of all of that. So it really is challenging, but again, we're very proud of where we are. We think we are the standard bearer for great television and music.
Yeah. Do you think that the balance of power in the industry and regarding to the Grammys, has it shifted towards the artist? I guess 2002, most people probably would have sold their grandmother to get on the Grammys. 2019, Ariana Grande didn't want to do the Grammys because she couldn't do the performance she wanted, or that's how she saw it anyway. Has that been a big change?
Yes, I certainly think and there's a bit of shift in terms of authority, and particularly again with artists that are a little more established, who, and frankly, in many ways, it's a great thing, because what you really want is an artist who has a vision of their own, of where they want to be, what they want to do, how they want to present themselves, what their music is like, and what their image is like, and what their career path is like. Those are really the cream of the crop, because the ones where you have to help create all of that are not generally as long-term. It's the visionary artists that are the most interesting and the most trend-setting. So what goes with that territory is a lot of authority and control from the artists themselves. And in many ways, that's very healthy. In many ways, it's very challenging as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the music scene is changing all the time. People don't necessarily see the Grammys as keeping pace with that over the years. Would you agree with that? Because obviously new music comes. A lot of people feel like the Grammys snubs them, or how do you deal with that kind of thing? How do you try and keep it relevant in the face of all that stuff?
Well, fair question. First premise is you can't make everybody happy. Yeah. I think you have to, if you're doing what I do, or if you're doing something in the realm of awards or honors or things of that nature, not everybody's going to be pleased with the results. What's even more challenging for us is it's not a typical process. So again, it's a peer award. So it's all the voting members of the Academy, which are about 13,000 now. And you have to qualify to be a voting member. And to be a voting member and qualify, you have to be a creative person who's actually recorded and released music. So you have to come from that community. So their viewpoint of what really exhibits excellence is a little different than the critic's point of view or even the fans' point of view. So very often you may see a Grammy Award go to an artist that you might not have even heard of, and yet the peers of that artist's genre feel this is what represents excellence. So right there, we're not going to necessarily have agreement from everybody, and that's okay. I think we, in many ways, are curating taste and pointing to music and artists that otherwise might not be recognized. So that's a fun thing to do. As far as being out of step, sometimes we are. And as an institution, our job is to keep up and frankly stay ahead of the curve and trends. And I think we've done a much, much better job today than we did years ago. And for the most part, I think we're pretty representative of the music community and the kind of music that's being made and the artists that like to make it.
Yeah, and obviously your position can be controversial sometimes as well. Let's talk briefly about 2018 Grammys, where obviously female artists felt they weren't very well represented, and then you made your step up comments afterwards. I'm guessing you probably regret using those words.
Well, I do. Look, words are important and they matter. And those two words, although frankly an idiomatic expression that gets used every day by so many of us, and I in particular would be having an ear to how many times that phrase is used since I used it myself. I think what was frustrating to me was knowing my own commitment and experience in terms of diversity and inclusion and fairness, and particularly to women and people of color. It was very frustrating to be in the center of that storm, if you will, about something that I know that I'm a good actor and a caring person about. That being said, I think once you get past the personal part of that, you have to think a little more broadly about it. And what I started to think about was, okay, this now puts a spotlight on an issue. And is it potentially a teaching moment, not only for me, but for others? And can we take this moment and use it as a platform to frankly amplify a problem that we have in our industry, which is quite significant? And that's exactly where I came out. And I said, yes, we can do that. And that's what we've done since then. And we can talk about that if you wish.
Yeah, so you're talking about the creation of the task force to deal with this. A year and a bit on, did you feel that worked? There was much more female representation at the Grammys this year than there had been in 2018.
Right. Well, in terms of female representation, I think we have to remember that in any given year, Music is recorded and released by a variety of people. The Academy really is representative of what that is. We don't make the music, we don't sign the artists, we don't record them, we don't write the songs, we don't do the song collaborations. We're a reflection on what happens. And in any given year, you're going to have a different group of artists making music. And in some years, there are more from one community or another. And if you remember a year where we had the big competition between, is it going to be Adele or Beyonce? And certainly a tremendous year for women. And then you have some years where they're not, and it's kind of a mix. What the task force, well, let me go back. The task force, the theory was, let's have an independent group take a look at the Academy as a starting point to see, are there areas of bias and areas of institutional difficulty that are barriers in any way, shape, or form to diverse folks having opportunity. And we have done that, and we learned a lot.
Were there barriers?
Yes, there were certainly some areas where we could do better. I would say the Academy has always had a great concern and attention to diversity and inclusion, and generally we are actually perhaps more diverse than the industry as a whole in many ways, but we certainly found areas where we thought we could improve, and we quickly, within the past year, have made a number of changes that I think are reflected. For example, we just announced the election of our new national officers of the Academy. It's one of the most diverse group of people we've ever had. Our committee structure has been diversified so that it's, for the most part, 50-50 men, women, 50-50 people of color. So that's great progress. We've changed the way we bring members in. We've changed, a whole number of things in this first year. But let me say this, that change of sociological nature like that is very nuanced, and it takes a lot of deep thought and action, and it isn't something that happens overnight. But I do think we've made a good start, and I think it's really important that the industry do the same, and we're going to do our best to help influence and shed a light on some of these areas.
Yeah, and obviously at the time, you had big pop stars tweeting about you. You had people writing letters asking you to resign and stuff. And then a few months later, you did decide to step down. Why was that? Was it all to do with this, or? That's
a good question. I'm glad you asked. There are many. Not many. There are some in the media who have really wanted to conflate my decision to step down from this position after 17 years with what happened last year. And the fact is there's no relationship whatsoever. The fact is that, as you said, 17 years is quite a run. One of the things that I observed when I started, because I'd been a volunteer in the organization, I witnessed the transition of the two previous CEOs, and they were both very rocky, to say the least. The first gentleman left within 6 months because he got a better job and a better offer. The second individual, after about a dozen years, left because there were issues and there was controversy. And so that was a mess. And one thing that I thought to myself in 2002 is, if I get this job when the time is appropriate for a transition on my watch, it'll be for sure the first time that we will have a smooth, orderly transition for the organization, because that's what it deserves and that's what we should have. So in order to do that, I would have to plan out well over a year in advance when that would happen. And when I looked at the future maybe 2 years ago, the then current contract that I had was going to expire on July 31 of this year, 2 months from now. And I thought, that's a natural place now to make that change. And so that was the plan from several years ago. And in order to have that work, I had to announce that this past May. And so therefore, those that like to speculate and conflate and create clicks in a story try to connect the two, but in fact, there's no connection whatsoever.
And your success has been announced. Deborah Duggan, so a woman is stepping up to take on your role. What advice do you have for her leading the Recording Academy into the future?
Well, I think she steps into a very wonderful organization that is well positioned for the future and for growth. We're very healthy on every level, financially, culturally, the work that we're doing, the achievements that we have been able to do in the past 17 years. So I think for her, she has the opportunity to really take this to the next level. My goal would be to support that and to cheer on and to do what I can to be helpful in that respect. But I think, one thing that I always have done coming into a new organization is to do two things. One is to listen a lot. And I think that hearing the stories, knowing the people, understanding the culture of the Academy from within and without is going to be very valuable. And then I think the second thing that's important is vision. And I think that Deborah has a vision coming into this. I think she will fine-tune that vision as she gets to experience the organization and the work that she does and will be doing. And, I am a fan and very optimistic that this is going to be a great run, and I wish for her the same kind of experience that I've had. It's once in a lifetime.
And how you probably don't get to write this yourself, sadly, but what do you want people to see as your legacy from your time there? Because it has been a long time. I don't know if Deborah's going to stay for 17 years, but probably not many people will stay that long in the future.
It's hard to think about your own legacy, to be honest, because when you're in it, you're doing it because you believe in it, you love it, you care about it, not because of what are people going to say and what's going to be written in a book someplace. But I would say that what I hope people will think is that we took an institution that's a steward of music and culture, and we raised it to a new platform and a new level of respect, of stability, of reach, and of influence. And that, so through that, whether it's the advocacy work, so a Music Modernization Act is a wonderful piece that we had a lot to do with, whether it's Music Cares, having given $60 million to people in times of need this coming year, we'll be helping close to 9,000 people in the music community with over $6.3 million in aid. That will continue to grow, helping people. The Grammy Museum, which started as one operation in Los Angeles, now has 3 others and growing, and potentially an international institution where we are the stewards of music culture and a home for music 24/7. The education programs that we do there. The Grammy Music Education Coalition, which was an idea I had about 2 years ago, which is to say, it's maybe audacious, but think in America that within the decade, every young person in a public school will have exposure to music and the arts, and that every school will have a program. Is that possible? I think it is, and so we created a coalition of over 30 institutions in music that care about and work in music education. And we now have 2 pilot programs in 2 cities in America, which are beginning this journey. Those are the kinds of things that I hope will be remembered, but also just a platform to build more, better, bigger, brighter.
And what are you going to do next? Can you remember how to do anything else after 17 years there?
That's a good question.
Are you going to get the band back together? What's
Definitely getting the band back together. The Savages, my high school band, we're all friends, and we've had rehearsals, and we're ready. I've been asked if we're available on January 26th to open the Grammys. Unfortunately, we have another booking that day, but I actually... I received in the mail, as some of you may get, these flyers with advertisements for discounts on your laundry and things and so on. And in there was this ad that struck my eye, and I put it aside. And the headline was, nurture dogs at your home and earn $1,000 a month. And I thought, gee, that sounds like fun. I'm going to have a bunch of dogs at the house that I'm going to have to pet and snuggle with. I think it says snuggle with dogs. That sounded very appealing. I think that's unlikely in reality. And the answer to your question is, with so much yet to do on my own agenda, with so much to do in the next 2 months in a transition to make sure that it's smooth and the keys are handed over of a well-running machine, I've sort of decided I'm going to wait and think about that till I'm on the other side of the job. Maybe somebody asked, have you ever taken 2 weeks off back to back? And I actually haven't, so maybe do a little bit of that. And then it'll be interesting because, you spend a lot of time, your life in a business, you know people, lots of things that are happening. I think the bottom line for me will be finding good things to do with good people that I like. That's the plan.
Or dogs.
Or dogs.
I think if that was a real job, most people in this room would probably quit right now. You'd make more money. But the scary countdown clock is going, so let's see if we've got any questions from the room. Anybody like to ask Neil something? Hand at the back. Tell us who you are and where you're from, please.
Bernie Resnick, lawyer from Philly. Neil and I know each other. I've been a voting member of the Academy for about 25 years. For those who are
It's
not
all your
voting
fault.
members, for those who are not voting members in the audience, can you elaborate a little more on what I think? I think the awards is the least important part of what we do with the Recording Academy, and the music cares and the advocacy, I think, are much very, very important. Can you elaborate for those of us who aren't familiar with it what those aspects are?
Good question. Glad you feel that way. Many of us do. So in advocacy, when I started, the Academy did not have an advocacy platform. We had a little office in Washington to serve our members, and I thought that was a missed opportunity, and I appointed a chief advocacy officer of the Academy, and we've devoted our time to looking at issues for the creative community, particularly having to do with getting paid properly, protecting our rights, things of that nature. And so over my tenure, that's become perhaps the number one, if not one of the top agendas of members of the Academy. Many folks join the Academy because they want to be part of a movement to ensure that we have a community that gets paid for their work and can frankly have a full career in music and not have to have a side job to make a living. So that's one of our key initiatives. Music Cares, we found out almost 30 years ago that the great jazz clarinet player Woody Herman and a jazz band leader had passed away, and his family didn't have enough money to pay for his funeral. And we thought, what a travesty of justice that is. How could that be? And when you think about it, musicians and creative people are not necessarily the best at maintaining their own business. They don't necessarily take good care of themselves or provide for the future. And we thought, as an academy, that would be a wonderful mission for us to undertake. And so over the past 30 years, as I said, we've given out $60 million to help music people in times of crisis. That could be simple. Could be a drummer who breaks his leg on the way in the morning to pick up the newspaper, can't work for a month. We'll come in and pay the bills so that they can sustain. It might be a natural disaster we had in America, for example, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Harvey, the hurricane in Puerto Rico, where people lose everything. Well, what does a musician do? They don't have necessarily insurance. They don't have a full-time company to support them. So we'll go in and take care of what they need. Those are the kinds of things we do, plus substance and addiction recovery, where we're literally saving lives. So those are some of the missions, along with the education piece I was talking about, that really are at the core of what our members care about and why they come and why they join, in addition to the more fun part, or maybe the more sexy part, of the awards and the Grammys themselves. Does that answer your question? Thank you for prompting me on that.
We might just squeeze one more in if someone's got a question. Anybody? Got a hand there. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Hi, Neil. I'm Tony Gottlieb. I haven't seen you in many years. It's nice to see you. There's been a lot of discussion over the past few days about Modernization Act's MLC portion. I'd like you to comment on how you see the other two segments of the bill, the AMP and the Classics Act, how you see that rolling out. Are you satisfied with what's coming out of that yet, or have you had a chance to look at how that progress seems to be going?
It's still a work in progress, and it's a good question. The fact is that the AMP Act, which relates to producers and engineers have never been mentioned in the law in America. And this is the first time that they've been acknowledged as an entity. And frankly, without producers and engineers, we don't have any recordings, we don't have recorded music, which would be a shame. So that's one area that's been fixed, and so producers and engineers now have an opportunity to get paid legitimately for their work, and that's part of what's institutionalized in the law. And putting that into practice is the work in progress. The part dealing with pre-72 is that if you're a recording artist and your recordings were released prior to 1972, you weren't necessarily guaranteed certain payments and rights under the law, and it was an anomaly that needed to be fixed because it's just totally unfair. There too, work in progress, but I think we're going to be in good shape there. It's just going to take a little time to get it all organized. Nice to see you, Tony.
Okay. Sadly, like Drake at the Grammys, they're cutting us off. So don't forget to stick around for the next session. In the meantime, I've been Mark Sutherland. Please give it up for Neil Portnow.
And how about a nice hand for Mark, who does a wonderful job. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Well,